I stood alone beside my husband's coffin. No son, no daughter, not even a neighbor. Just me, Iris Camden, 79 years old, with the cold wind pushing through the chapel doors as if it couldn't stand to stay either. The funeral director shifted awkwardly. "Would you like us to wait a few more minutes, Miss Camden?" I shook my head. "Start the service." Arthur would have hated delays. He was a man who took his pills by the clock, folded his shirts with military precision, and believed punctuality was respect made visible. So they began. The pastor's voice was flat, the flowers too bright, the casket too polished. I sat through it all, 5 empty chairs around me, thinking how Arthur would have frowned and whispered, "Where are the kids?" Where indeed? My son Grant had sent a one-line text that morning. "Sorry, Mom, something came up." No explanation. My daughter Tessa hadn't called at all. The final prayer ended, the coffin lowered, and I stood still, my heels sinking slightly into the wet ground. Arthur Camden, beloved husband, father, forgotten. That word followed me home like a ghost. Back home, the silence was deafening. Arthur's recliner sat untouched by the window, the TV remote still resting exactly where he had left it. For a moment, I stood there, waiting to hear the sound of the evening news or the creak of his slippers on the floor. But there was nothing, only the tick of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator. I poured myself a glass of wine, an expensive bottle we had saved for company that never came, and sat at the kitchen table. I unlocked my phone, not out of habit, but to fill the air with something that wasn't grief. Grant's face appeared first, a wide grin, golf club in hand, captioned "Killer Swing, Deals Made, Perfect Weather." The post was from the same hour his father was being lowered into the ground. Then came Tessa. Her photo showed 3 women clinking champagne glasses, bright smiles, sunlight pouring through a cafe window. Girls' brunch, bottomless mimosas, living our best lives. I stared at their faces for a long time. The world had moved on without even a pause. Arthur had spent his life teaching them manners, gratitude, showing up for people when it mattered, and yet not one of them had shown up for him. I set the phone face down and whispered into the empty room. "You'd laugh at this, wouldn't you, Arthur? You'd call it what it is, noise." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like it agreed. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house still smelled faintly of Arthur's aftershave, that sharp cedar scent that lingered on the air long after he was gone. I walked to his study, the one room I had barely entered since his passing. The desk drawers were labeled neatly in his handwriting: utilities, receipts, estate. I pulled the last one open. Inside lay the folder I already knew existed but had avoided for weeks. Cream-colored, bound with a thin elastic strap, the label written in his steady pen: Estate Camden. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it under the soft yellow light. There it was, our will, drafted years ago, reviewed, signed, and tucked away with care. Everything was divided equally between Grant and Tessa: the house, the savings, even the lake cabin they never visited, except when tax season reminded them it still existed. Arthur believed in fairness. So had I once, but staring at those pages now, the words blurred into something colder. Fairness, I realized, had cost us more than love ever did. I pressed my palm flat over the first page, feeling the indentation of Arthur's signature beneath my skin. If they couldn't show up for their father's goodbye, I thought, why was I still showing up for them on paper? I took another sip of wine and opened the folder again, this time slower. Arthur had left every record in perfect order: receipts, copies of checks, notes in the margins written in his careful hand. Each page felt like a quiet confession of a life spent giving. The first stack was for Tessa, a $12,000 transfer marked wedding expenses. She had called it a small ceremony, yet the photos later showed chandeliers and champagne fountains. Then came the house repairs, $7,500 for a leaking roof. The baby's room got soaked, she had said. A few pages later, braces for Noah, summer camp fees, college applications, every line of withdrawal made without hesitation. Grant's folder was thicker. $25,000 for his startup fizzled in 6 months, $10,000 for a used car he never paid insurance on, even tax penalties quietly covered so his reputation wouldn't suffer. As I flipped through the years, the totals blurred. It wasn't the money that hurt, it was the pattern. Help was always accepted, gratitude was not. Arthur used to say, "Paper doesn't lie, Iris, it tells you who kept the lights on." And now, under the kitchen lamp, surrounded by decades of proof, I realized how long I'd mistaken duty for love. I stacked the papers neatly again, whispering to no one, "Fairness, my dear Arthur, has been far too expensive." By noon, the sun cut through the curtains sharp and bright against the kitchen tiles. I sat there, still in my robe, staring at the folders stacked neatly in front of me. So much proof of devotion, and yet not a trace of return. Arthur had always believed in equality. If we give them the same, they'll stand on even ground, he'd say. But equality only works when hearts are level too. Grant and Tessa had long drifted from that ground. They no longer called unless something needed fixing, signing, or funding. And I had allowed it out of love, or maybe out of habit. But habits can outlive reason. I rose from the table and walked to the living room. On the mantel sat our wedding photo, Arthur in his navy suit, me in lace and laughter. Beside it, a smaller frame of our children at the lake, all sunburned and smiling. I traced the glass with my fingertip. Fairness wasn't sameness, I thought. It was honesty. It was giving where love still lived. Tomorrow, I would call our lawyer, Caleb Dorsey. He had helped us buy this house 40 years ago. He'd understand what needed to be done. Arthur had lived with dignity. I intended to protect that dignity even now. Caleb Dorsey's office still smelled like old paper and lemon polish, just as it had the last time Arthur and I were there together. The framed certificates on the wall hadn't moved, and neither had the calm, measured tone of the man behind the desk. "Iris," he greeted warmly, standing as I entered. "It's been a long time." "Too long," I said, lowering myself into the leather chair. "I'm here to revise my will." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "All right, what sort of revision?" "I want to remove Grant and Tessa completely," I said evenly. He blinked, but didn't argue. "May I ask if this is temporary, just an adjustment?" "No," I replied. "It's permanent. My husband died alone, and our children didn't come. Not a call, not a flower. They were busy. Let's make sure they stay that way." Caleb nodded slowly. "And the assets, you'd like to redirect them elsewhere?" "Yes," I said, "to my grandson, Noah Reed, the only one who ever came without being asked." Caleb took notes quickly. "We can create an irrevocable trust in his name, restricted until he's 30. Earlier withdrawals only for education, housing, or medical expenses." "That sounds perfect." He hesitated. "You understand this change can't easily be undone." "I'm counting on it," I said. He smiled faintly, the kind reserved for clients who had already made peace with their decision. For the next hour, we reviewed the language line by line, clauses, signatures, contingencies, each one a nail sealing the past shut. By the time I stood to leave, Caleb said quietly, "You know, Iris, most people your age hesitate." I met his eyes. "I've hesitated long enough." That evening, the house felt softer somehow. Not lighter, just less burdened. I brewed tea instead of pouring wine and sat by the window as the phone rang in the other room. When I saw the name on the screen, my heart stumbled. "Noah." "Grandma." His voice was tentative, almost shy. I just heard about Grandpa. Mom never told me he passed. I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes, the ache settling deep. "It's been 3 weeks, sweetheart," I said gently. "But you're here now. That's what matters." He hesitated. "Can I come by tomorrow? I'd like to see you." "Of course," I whispered. The next day, he arrived carrying a bag of oranges and a nervous smile. Taller than I remembered, a little scruffy, but still with that kind heart shining through. He hugged me the way young people do, halfway at first, then fully once they feel permission. We sat in the kitchen, drinking lemonade. He looked around the house like it was a museum of his childhood. "I missed his funeral," he said softly. "I'll never forgive myself." "You weren't the one who chose to miss it," I told him. After a moment, I went to the drawer and brought out the trust papers, still unsigned.
"This," I said, handing it to him, "is my plan." He frowned as he read. "Grandma, why me?" "Because you showed up," I said, "and that's all I ever wanted." Tessa arrived unannounced the next morning. Her black sub pulled into the driveway too fast, gravel scattering under the tires. She didn't knock, she never did, just pushed open the door and called out, "Mom, we need to talk." I stayed at the table, folding laundry, one careful shirt at a time. "I've been busy," I said, without looking up. "Busy with what?" she asked, dropping her handbag onto the chair. Her tone was sharp, the kind that used to make me flinch when she was a teenager. "I heard from Noah," she continued. "He said you're changing your will. Is that true?" I nodded. "Yes, you and Grant are being removed." Her laugh was quick, bitter. "You're kidding. After everything we've done for you?" I met her eyes. "Everything I've done for you, Tessa. You didn't come to your father's funeral. You didn't call. You didn't send flowers." "I had an appointment," she snapped. "Yes," I said quietly. "Your nails, and then brunch. I saw the photos." She froze for a moment, color rising in her cheeks. "Families help each other," she said finally. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Mothers help. Daughters show up." The air between us went still. "You're punishing us," she said. I folded the last towel, smoothed the edge, and placed it in the basket. "I'm not punishing anyone, Tessa. I'm freeing myself." Grant came the following afternoon, and he didn't come alone. His wife Meredith followed a few steps behind, wearing a tailored coat and that polite smile that always looked like it cost effort. He knocked twice at least and waited for me to answer. "Mom," he said as I opened the door, "can we come in?" I stepped aside. The air between us was cautious, rehearsed. They sat on the edge of the sofa like visitors in a stranger's home. "I heard from Tessa," Grant began, "and from Noah. I think there's been some confusion." I said nothing.
Meredith crossed her legs neatly, diamonds flashing. "We know this has been a hard time," she said smoothly. "People make emotional decisions after loss." I studied her face. "You didn't come to his funeral either." She hesitated. "I had a client dinner, international account." Grant cleared his throat. "Mom, I should have come, I know that, but maybe we can talk about the will. Noah's too young. He doesn't know how to manage property or investments. He could be taken advantage of." "By whom?" I asked. Neither of them answered. "You think this is extreme?" I continued. "But what's extreme is a father buried alone." Grant's jaw tightened. "So that's it? We're cut off?" "No," I said evenly. "You cut yourselves off. I'm just acknowledging the fact." Meredith rose, gathering her purse. "This could get complicated, Iris." "It won't," I said. "The paperwork's clean." And I showed them both the door. 2 days later, I walked into the Riverton Savings Bank, a place that had handled every check and mortgage Arthur and I ever signed. The marble floors gleamed like nothing bad ever happened there. Behind the glass doors waited Rita Calder, the bank's senior manager, a woman with sharp eyes and a softer voice. "Mrs. Camden," she said, standing. "It's good to see you again. How can we help today?" "I need to finalize a trust," I told her, "and close all linked transfers under my children's names." She opened the file on her screen. "I see you're removing beneficiaries." "Yes, permanently." We went line by line, accounts, bonds, property deeds, insurance policies. Each correction felt like lifting a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. "I'd also like safeguards," I added. "Ironclad. No one should be able to pressure Noah later." Rita nodded. "We'll structure the disbursements to release only for education, housing, or healthcare until he's 30. After that, full control, but still under a monitored account." "That's exactly what I want." She looked up. "Can I ask, are you doing this out of anger?" I smiled faintly. "No, dear, out of clarity." When I left the bank, the autumn air felt cleaner somehow, as if I'd signed not just papers, but peace itself. That evening, a soft knock echoed on my door. It was Marilyn Brooks, my neighbor of 40 years, holding a tin of lemon shortbread like a peace offering. She'd seen Grant's car earlier, and curiosity always walked her over. "I saw your son here yesterday," she said as soon as I opened the door. "Did he bring flowers or just excuses?" "Just excuses," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. She smiled knowingly and set the cookies on the table. We poured tea. Hers chamomile, mine black and strong. I finally told them, I said quietly. Grant and Tessa are out of the will. Noah's the only one who ever came back without being asked. Marilyn let out a long breath. About time, Iris. I looked at her, surprised by the bluntness. She softened. I've watched you for years, writing checks while they took vacations, babysitting while they forgot birthdays. You didn't snap, dear. You just peeled back everything that wasn't love. Her words settled in the room like warm air after a storm. Outside, the light was fading, the air crisp with early fall. I don't regret it, I said finally. Marilyn smiled. Good. Regrets for people who waited too long. 3 days later, an envelope arrived in the afternoon mail. No return address, just my name written in a careful hand I recognized instantly. Noah's. I brought it to the kitchen and let it sit beside my teacup while I finished washing the dishes. I didn't open it right away. Some words I've learned deserve silence around them. When I finally unfolded the letter, my hands trembled slightly. Dear Grandma, I wanted to write this instead of texting. I know I could have said it in person, but I needed to find the right words. I'm grateful, not just for what you've given me, but for how you've seen me. You've never asked me to be anything I'm not. You made space for me when no one else did. I didn't know about Grandpa. If I had, I would have been there. I'm angry at Mom for not telling me, but I'm more sorry than angry. I won't waste what you've trusted me with. Love, Noah. I read it 3 times, once with dry eyes, once with a hand over my heart, and once through quiet tears. Arthur would have said, that boy's got the right kind of backbone, and he'd have been right. That night, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive again. Quiet, yes, but warm. I brewed real tea, not the instant kind I used to make when I was too tired to care. The scent of bergamot filled the kitchen. After dinner, I opened the hall closet and pulled out Arthur's old record player. It still had the faint crackle from the last time we danced. I wiped the dust, placed the needle, and let a slow tune fill the room. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to turn it off. I slipped off my shoes and let the rhythm move through my body. Not gracefully, my knees protested, but freely. The living room light reflected off the glass cabinet where the photo of Arthur still stood. I smiled toward it. You told me to keep dancing, I whispered. I'm finally listening. Later, I cleaned the fireplace, swept out the cold ashes, and found a small note tucked behind the kindling basket. Arthur's handwriting, steady, unmistakable. Keep dancing, even if it's just in the kitchen. I sat back on the rug, tears welling but not falling. He had known what life might try to take from me, and somehow he'd left me a way to remember who I was. A week later, a white envelope from Caleb's office arrived. It wasn't dramatic, no stamp of finality, no bold lettering, just paperwork quietly confirming what had already taken root inside me. The trust was active. Noah's name now lived on every deed, every account, every space where Grant and Tessa's names had once been. I sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon light spilling across the paper. There was no triumph in it, no bitterness either, only calm. It felt like setting down a heavy suitcase after carrying it far too long. Outside, the roses Arthur planted had surrendered to the cold. He used to say, they didn't die, they rested. That's what this felt like. Not an ending, but rest. As I folded the letter and tucked it into the estate drawer, I thought about what people call peace. It isn't silence or solitude or forgiveness. It's knowing you've done what's right, even when no one claps for you. I've learned that love without respect becomes obligation, and obligation without gratitude becomes chains. I broke mine late, but not too late. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, don't wait for someone to hand you peace. Choose it. Do not confuse duty with worth. Do not mistake love for guilt. And if your home has grown quiet, let it be the kind of quiet that heals, not the kind that hides. Because peace, when finally earned, is the loudest freedom there is. Now, if this story found something true in you, like, share, or leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And remember, it's never too late to come home to yourself.